Did you really think I would stay? It is over.
I gave you everything. How could you do this?
The divorce papers arrived without a single argument, without a single tear, and without a single explanation. One ordinary Tuesday morning, while the sun poured warm golden light across the tiny apartment where I had spent years trying to build a family, I found my marriage reduced to a few silent signatures lying on the kitchen table. My wife had already left before sunrise. She took her clothes, her photographs, and every trace of our future together. She didn't leave a letter. She didn't answer my calls. She simply disappeared from my life as if I had never mattered. I believe that was the worst day I would ever experience. I had no idea that only 3 days later, a sleek private jet belonging to one of the richest black families in America would land at the local airport, looking for me. Before we continue this emotional journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who still believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Echo. Your support helps stories like this reach people who need hope the most. My name is Adrian Mercer, and until that week, my life was painfully ordinary. I worked as a maintenance supervisor at a small community hospital. The pay was enough to survive, but never enough to dream. Every morning I fixed broken pipes, repaired damaged walls, and kept the building running while doctors and nurses saved lives. Nobody noticed the man carrying the toolbox through the hallways. I never expected recognition. I only wanted an honest life and a peaceful home. For years, I believed my marriage with Vanessa was built on trust. We had struggled financially together, celebrated small victories together, and comforted each other through disappointments. At least, that was what I believed. Looking back, I realized the distance between us had been growing quietly. She spent more time on her phone, came home later from work, and smiled less whenever I spoke about our future. I blamed stress, rising bills, and the pressures of life. I never imagined she had already decided to leave. The silence after the divorce was heavier than any argument could have been. Friends stopped calling because they didn't know what to say. My neighbors avoided awkward conversations. I continued going to work every day because repairing broken buildings felt easier than repairing my own heart. Every evening I returned to an empty apartment where even the ticking clock sounded lonely. On the third morning after the divorce, something happened that made everyone in town stop and stare. A long black luxury SUV pulled into the hospital parking lot just before lunch. Moments later, 2 sharply dressed men stepped out and politely asked the receptionist where they could find Adrian Mercer. Nurses whispered. Patients watched through the windows. My first thought was that someone had mistaken me for another person. The older gentleman introduced himself as Samuel Brooks, a legal advisor representing the prestigious Holloway family. Their name alone was known across the country. The Holloways owned technology companies, hospitals, scholarship foundations, and charitable organizations worth billions of dollars. Their story of building generational wealth while giving back to struggling communities had inspired millions. Yet somehow they were asking for me. Samuel apologized for interrupting my work and explained that the family requested my immediate presence. Their private jet was already waiting at the regional airport. They would answer every question once I arrived. He understood how unbelievable the situation sounded, but he promised everything would become clear. Every logical part of my mind told me not to go. I had just been abandoned by the person I loved most. I wasn't prepared for another emotional surprise. Yet something inside me whispered that this unexpected invitation carried a purpose I couldn't ignore. Within an hour, I found myself sitting inside a luxurious private jet, looking out the window as my small hometown disappeared beneath the clouds. I had never flown on a private aircraft before. The polished wood interior, soft leather seats, and quiet elegance felt like another world entirely. Yet my thoughts remained trapped inside my recent heartbreak. After landing, another vehicle transported me through tree-lined roads until we reached an incredible estate surrounded by gardens, fountains, and historic oak trees. Despite the wealth surrounding me, there was a peaceful warmth rather than arrogance. Staff members greeted each other with genuine smiles. It felt less like a mansion and more like a home built on respect. Waiting inside was Evelyn Holloway, the graceful matriarch of the family. Although newspapers often described her as one of America's most influential businesswomen, she welcomed me with the kindness of a grandmother greeting an old friend. Her silver hair framed a face filled with wisdom rather than pride. She explained something that completely changed how I understood my own life. Nearly 18 years earlier, before I graduated high school, I had volunteered every weekend at a neighborhood food pantry. One rainy afternoon, I noticed an exhausted woman struggling to carry groceries while comforting two frightened children. Without asking questions, I helped load her supplies, fixed the broken wheel on her shopping cart, and quietly paid for medicine she couldn't afford. I never asked her name because I believed kindness should never expect a reward. That woman had been Evelyn Holloway. At that time, her late husband had secretly lost almost everything during a devastating business collapse. To protect employees, they sold properties, borrowed money, and lived privately through their hardest season while rebuilding from nothing. Few people knew the truth. Most former friends disappeared the moment the family's fortune vanished. But one young volunteer treated them with dignity without knowing who they were. She had never forgotten. Years later, after rebuilding an even greater business empire, Evelyn searched for the young man who had shown her compassion during her darkest day. She discovered my volunteer records, followed my quiet career, and recently learned about my divorce. She looked directly into my eyes and said that life had finally given her the chance to repay a debt that money alone could never erase. I struggled to believe what I was hearing. I had completely forgotten that rainy afternoon. For me, helping strangers had simply been the right thing to do. I never imagined a single act of kindness could travel through nearly 2 decades before returning to my life. The Holloway family didn't offer me charity. Instead, they offered dignity. Their foundation was opening a nationwide network of community medical centers focused on serving low-income neighborhoods. Evelyn believed someone who had spent years quietly fixing hospitals while treating every worker with respect understood service better than executives who had only studied numbers. She offered me a leadership position overseeing facility operations across the organization, complete with training, mentorship, and opportunities one had never dreamed possible. For several moments I couldn't speak. Just days earlier I had questioned whether my life held any purpose. Now someone believed in me more than I believed in myself. The following months transformed everything. I studied harder than I ever had before. Experienced mentors patiently taught me business management, leadership, budgeting, and organizational planning. Every mistake became a lesson instead of a failure. Rather than judging my humble background, the Holloway family celebrated it because they believed compassion could never be taught in classrooms. As my confidence slowly returned, I realized something important. My worth had never depended on whether someone chose to stay in my life. My value had always existed in the character I carried when nobody was watching. One afternoon, while visiting a newly renovated clinic, I noticed an elderly janitor repairing a leaking sink. Without thinking, I grabbed a wrench and worked beside him. Several employees stared in surprise, but the janitor smiled warmly. At that moment, I remembered exactly who I had always been. Success had changed my circumstances but not my heart. News about the foundation's expansion soon attracted national attention. During one televised interview, I spoke not about business achievements, but about kindness, quiet service, and treating invisible people with respect. The interview spread across social media because people were tired of hearing success measured only by wealth. Several weeks later, I unexpectedly received a handwritten letter. It was from Vanessa. She admitted she had believed I would never become anything more than an ordinary maintenance worker. She confessed she had chased a life she believed would offer greater comfort and status, only to discover that wealth without loyalty felt empty. She apologized for leaving without explanation and asked if we could meet. I folded the letter carefully before placing it inside a drawer. There was no anger left inside me. Time had replaced bitterness with understanding. Some people walk away because they cannot see your future. Others stay because they believe in your character long before success arrives. I never replied. Instead, I continued helping build clinics, funding scholarship programs, and creating employment opportunities for hardworking people often overlooked by society. Every ribbon-cutting ceremony reminded me that true success is measured by the number of lives improved rather than the size of a bank account. Years later, I returned to the same neighborhood food pantry where everything had quietly begun. The building had grown larger, serving hundreds of families every week. I volunteered anonymously, carrying grocery bags, repairing shelves, and greeting strangers with the same smile I had offered years before. One young volunteer asked why someone with my responsibilities still found time for such simple work. The answer was easy. Because kindness had found me long before success ever did. Because the greatest opportunities often begin with the smallest unseen decisions. Because every person standing in front of us may be carrying a burden we cannot imagine. And because somewhere in this world, a single act of compassion may already be changing a life we will never expect. Before this story comes to its end, I have one heartfelt request. Please write, "Kindness always comes back," in the comments if you believe even the smallest good deed can change someone's future. As I stood outside the food pantry watching children laugh beneath the bright afternoon sunshine, I realized my wife had not ended my story. Her silent goodbye had simply opened the door to a life I never could have imagined. The private jet, the wealthy family, and the extraordinary opportunities were never the true miracle. The real miracle was discovering that goodness never disappears. Sometimes it travels quietly through the years, until the exact moment your broken heart needs hope again. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you to never stop choosing kindness, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Kindness Echo. Together, we can keep spreading stories that remind the world that kindness, faith, and hope always find their way home.